Good day. Welcome to another edition of the QB Power Hour. I'm Dan DeLong, and we have a special guest with us today, along with Michelle Long. But today is going to be all about our series of niche nuances. And today we're going to be talking about e-commerce. And one of the things that I hope we've determined is how to spell e-commerce. Is there a dash? Is there a capital E? Is there a capital C? If that's my takeaway from today, I think that will be great. Michelle, you want to introduce
Hi,
yourself?
everybody. Glad you guys are joining us today. Michelle Long with Long for Success, author of 5 books. Check them out on Amazon. Love to have you guys join us for on the Facebook group. I need to update that. Dan, aren't we over 9,000 members now on
Yeah,
our Facebook
yeah,
group?
we are well over 9,000, close to 10.
Yeah, so we'd love to have you join us out there, continue the conversation, and I hope everybody is surviving tax season, staying safe, and we're very glad to have Veronica joining us today.
My name is Dan DeLong, owner of Danwith, a former Intuit employee. Technically edited QBO for Dummies in the 5th edition. And, the motto of my company is transforming businesses through technology. And, we were planning this particular session a couple weeks ago, unknown to the state of current affairs. And, it's definitely one thing about e-commerce is that it's definitely looking pretty good right now. So we have a special guest with us today, Veronica Wasek. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. So I am Veronica Wasek. I'm an entrepreneur, CPA, a Quickbooks online expert, and I specialize in e-commerce. I'm also a mentor and educator. I'm the CEO and founder of VM Wasek, and we work with clients all throughout the U.S. In various industries, but as of last year, switched my niche to e-commerce and now working with a lot of e-commerce sellers. I have a Facebook group also, 5-Minute Bookkeeping with QuickBooks Online. You can also find me on my blog at 5-Minute Bookkeeping. And I also have an online course, the 5MB Academy. And I also have a YouTube channel, and you can find all of my videos as well as my e-commerce playlist on my YouTube channel.
Awesome. Now, I detect a theme with the 5-minute bookkeeping. So tell us a little bit about how that started.
Yes, it's interesting because people have a different opinion of what 5-minute bookkeeping means to them. But the way it started was that many years ago when I had my business for maybe a year or two, I was working with a client and training her on QuickBooks Desktop and showing her what she was going to do her own books. And she just turned to me like, oh my gosh, like, do you mean I have to do all of this work? And I said, well, you do if you want to do your own bookkeeping. And she said, well, I don't think I can do it. And I said, well, can you do 5 minutes a day? And she said, yes, I can do 5 minutes a day. And so that's where it all started, the idea of 5-minute bookkeeping, of encouraging business owners to engage with their financials at least 5 minutes a day.
So the idea of eating the elephant 5 minutes at a time instead of one bite at a time.
Yeah, because most of them just tend to put it off till it's done. Yeah, it's an elephant at that point.
Especially if they're behind in their bookkeeping.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Okay, I love that.
Little updates on the QB Power Hour. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the niche nuances in e-commerce. Next episode is going to be all about bank feeds. And then we, of course, have the PDFs of the slides, the link there, as well as current QB Power Hours, the link to be able to go see the current list of QB Power Hour episodes, and then historicals. You can go to Michelle's YouTube channel. And then we also have the podcast to be able to listen to us on the go. Obviously, you won't be able to see the slides there, but getting something like today's episode is very good to even just to hear. So some other upcoming events, obviously with the new episodes coming out, and then we also have the VCon and Roadshow. You can always go to qbtrainingevents.com and look for live training in your area. Probably not today. There's probably not going to be too many live trainings in that area, but, especially if there's more than 10 people.
Yes, we
So
are on hold for right now.
yeah. So events like this, where you can come in and be self-quarantined and still be able to get some other human interactions, as well as learn a little something. So here we go. So I'm going to launch the first poll. So again, we would just want to get an understanding of what version of QuickBooks are you currently using, because as we talk about e-commerce, there's going to be a bit of an interesting facets of the e-commerce. So we want to get an idea of whether you're using online, QuickBooks Desktop, or both, or not at all. So go ahead and answer that question.
And Dan, while they're doing that, if you all would like to get rid of the webcam pictures, you can't do it right this minute while the poll is open, but when we close that poll, you can close and turn off the webcam pictures, or you can drag and drop to minimize that part of the window so that you don't have to see that and you can see more of the slides.
Yeah, it's a great call out there, because every once in a while there's it depends on what you saw it last. So it certainly could be an issue if you're visually challenged, like some of us that need glasses to be able to see those slides or the prints on the slides.
I think almost all accountants and bookkeepers wind up needing glasses at some point.
Probably. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So most are using both, and then QuickBooks Online gets a little nod, and then QuickBooks Desktop. So let me go ahead and hide that, and then we'll move back to the slides. Okay, so our agenda today with e-commerce niche nuances, I will talk about sales channels, payment processors, integrations, being able to connect whatever you're selling, whatever platform you're selling on, into your bookkeeping, and then inventory, cost of goods sold, and then sales tax. So these are all elephants. Speaking of elephants, these are big things that I know, from my perspective of when I worked at Intuit, a lot of people shied away from these areas. So not only is it one of them, it's like the big four of the things that people really shied away. So I applaud Veronica for jumping into this niche and being able to tackle it. So I'm going to hand the slides over to her. So give me 1 second here to make her the presenter. And then we'll go on. Let's see, there we go. Okay, the ball should be in your court, and then you should just be able to share your slides.
Okay, and I want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing my slides?
We're seeing the other screen, if that's, there you go.
All right, let's do it. There we go.
Perfect.
All right, so let me jump right in. Sorry, I'm trying to get the mic. Okay, I'll talk this way so make sure I'm talking into the mic still. We have to adapt with technology, especially e-commerce. We have to adapt. So first thing we need to know about e-commerce is that you have sales channels and you have payment processors. And if you think about it from the standpoint of an invoice and a customer payment in QuickBooks, if we think about it that way, that's what it is in e-commerce, but no invoices and no customer payments. So you have sales that are happening in a sales channel, and the ones that you probably know are like Amazon, Shopify, and some others. And in those sales, you have income and other components of sales as well, like returns and refunds, fees, reserves, loans, debit cards, sales taxes. It's all happening in that sales channel. And then on the right, we have what's being deposited into QuickBooks, or into the bank account, what we're seeing as deposits in QuickBooks. And you'll see things like Amazon payments, Shopify payments, Stripe, PayPal, Square, and you'll see some fees coming out. And the most important thing you need to understand is that what we're seeing deposited in the bank account is a net amount. So it's net of refunds, it's net of fees. It may include even loan transactions happening in those net amounts. Sales taxes are in there as well. And there's a lot of factors that affect then what we see being deposited in QuickBooks, including the type of sales channel. Each sales channel does things differently. The different payment processors have locations, timing. There's a lot of timing differences between what happens in a sales channel versus what is being processed by the payment processor, and then what we end up seeing in QuickBooks.
Now, is that pretty universal with the net deposit for all of them, or there's some payment processors that will do gross and then take out their fees, or is that just pretty much standard for all online payment processors?
It's fairly standard, at least for all the ones that I have worked with, to then see just net amounts being deposited in the bank account.
Gotcha. All right, thanks.
So the next important thing you need to know is, because most people say, well, okay, if this all of this is happening in this sales channel, can't I just integrate that sales channel with QuickBooks? And well, you can, and there are a lot of integrations. If you go to apps.com and look up some, you'll find these apps. These are what's labeled as e-commerce apps. And you'll see that there's a lot of them. So then how do you choose? Because there's a lot. Well, there's some guidelines that I've learned from other people that I have found also to be best practices. And also just keep in mind that an integration doesn't mean that things are going to, as I like to say, automatically going to be done in QuickBooks, because there are different types of integrations and they're doing different things. And also the app developers are not accountants for the most part. And so they're really doing more of a data dump, in my opinion, in many cases. And so we have to be careful. So the things that what are the things that we want to avoid in these apps? Sending detailed transactions into QuickBooks Online, especially for big sellers. You do not need 1,000 transactions a day going into QuickBooks, because at some point it'll slow everything down and you don't need to see those details. You want to see, and I'll summarize, I guess, the no and the yes is sort of the same thing on both sides here, but we want to see fees broken out in QuickBooks, and we want to see those fees that are then being broken out and being brought into QuickBooks. We want to be able to reconcile the amounts that are being deposited in QuickBooks with the amounts being processed by the sales channel or being sold on, the amounts being processed by the payment processor or being sold through that sales channel. We need to make sure that we have a really good integration in terms of the account mapping and being able to control the different components of income. As we said before, we have sales, we have refunds, we have discounts, sales taxes, fees, and ideally we want to be able to map each of those components into separate accounts in QuickBooks for those specific sales channels.
When you talk about summarized totals in QuickBooks, how much detail do you ultimately expect to get in QuickBooks? As far as like the different, depending if it's clothing, for example, do you want to have shoes versus versus shirts versus pants, or different departments broken down, or is that something you look for, or is it really just what you handle that in the selling platform as far as getting that detail or gleaning those insights?
Yeah, normally you're handling that in the selling platform. And when you think about even online sellers, that's where they live. So they're more comfortable getting the data from there than they would be from QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, I mean, in terms of what we're bringing in summarized, it may be daily totals. It might be totals for a certain period. For example, Amazon processes payments every 2 weeks. And we'll talk about later the app that I like to use, that you have the option of bringing in those totals for that 2-week period with Amazon.
Great.
All right. Next is, and then evaluating these integrations. What do we need to be aware of? Because one size doesn't fit all, and it just depends on a particular client, what their needs are, and what we would recommend for them to use as an integration tool. So as with any integration, I always like to make a list of the client's requirements. What do they need specifically and specific to their business? Evaluate your options. As you know, there are many options. Consider the quality of the integration with QBO or with QuickBooks Desktop. And again, it's like, how can we break out all of the different components of sales? Test in small batches. Always test in small batches. And what I mean is, if you then go ahead and set up that integration, just test it for 1 or 2 days to make sure it's going to bring over the data the way you expected. What I see most of my colleagues do is like, oh, I found an app, I'm going to connect it to QuickBooks, and now I'm going to send over a year's worth of transactions. You don't want to do that, because I can guarantee you will likely have to delete because maybe it didn't work the way you expected.
Yeah, and a good damage control plan would be, setting up some kind of backup app before, especially if you're doing online, because knowing that there is no restore point, out of the box for QuickBooks Online. Desktop, you have a little bit of a better option, but again, making sure that you've made a backup before you integrate these sort of things, and then there's a point of no return, and then trying to figure out, okay, how do I back this up and get back to where I started, because it didn't, I need to redo the mappings or what have you. So good point there.
And another alternative is to create a new trial subscription, create one of those free 30-day trial subscriptions, and use something like Chronobooks to actually back up the data from the live company and then import it into that new subscription to do all your testing over there. So you've got the real company info, but in a separate subscription, so you don't mess it up. But very important, important stuff.
Yeah, you need to, now you can't use Chronobooks anymore, because unless it's advanced.
That's true. There are other ones out there like Rewind and some other ones, apps that'll do the same stuff.
And one thing to keep in mind too, because we have a lot of people who are using QuickBooks Online and now are taking QuickBooks Desktop clients, and they don't necessarily realize that you can make a backup in QB Desktop. So I saw a conversation in my own Facebook group about someone who didn't know she could make a backup in QuickBooks Desktop. And yeah, when I was working on desktop primarily, it was so easy. The first thing you did was make that backup, and then if you messed it up, you just reinstall that backup and kept going.
Yeah, my original training for when I worked at Intuit was one of the steps of troubleshooting, was make a damage control plan. If something goes horribly wrong, what would you do to make sure that at least before you started, you're back to where you started, and backups are a key part of that.
Absolutely. And let's see, lastly, number 5 is customize your workflows, because apps change workflows. And so then you have to understand how this, bringing over this data, how that is changing the workflow in QuickBooks Online. And lastly, understanding that integration while it may eliminate double data entry, does not eliminate the need to do proper accounting. And I think that's something that a lot of people are kind of misinformed about apps. They think, oh, that eliminates work, and it's changing work, perhaps eliminating double entry, but you still have to make sure it's going in there properly.
Yeah, you end up being a manager of the data as opposed to the creator of the data. So it's,
Yeah,
you still have to make sure it's doing its thing. And
absolutely. And as I mentioned before, I do have a favorite app that I have found, and it's called A2X. And so it is an integrator app, and you can use it for Amazon and Shopify to integrate those sales channels with QuickBooks Online. And it pretty much ticks the box for everything that I mentioned before about summary entries. It records sales into the correct month, so they actually have accountants on staff who understand the needs that we have as accountants and bookkeepers, and so they do a great job of really. I think they've addressed a lot of the issues that we come across with other apps that are more doing what I call a data dump into QuickBooks. I think A2X is really good about understanding what we as accountants need and what that looks like. There is the ability to reconcile the amounts from the sales channel into what's deposited into QuickBooks, and especially for Amazon, once the entries come in from A2X, you just go to the bank feed and you just match. It's wonderful, saves a lot of time. They do have a very good integration. They don't sync inventory items in detail to QuickBooks Online, and I think I forgot to mention that before about we don't want to try to manage inventory in QuickBooks Online, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. You have the ability to adjust cost of goods sold based on if you track data in A2X in a particular way. They have amazing support, and it saves you a lot of time. So I definitely encourage you to look into A2X if you haven't worked with it before.
now, do they support other shopping carts as well, or do they
No.
only Shopify?
Yeah. They I think what they started out as Amazon sellers that maybe had an accounting background, and so I think probably created this app for their own use, and then realized that there was a market for it. So it's Amazon and Shopify right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's an important thing to kind of step back and find out what the client's needs are, and then one, if they're willing to modify what they're currently doing to make things simple, based on your comfort level as far as what you can support them with is a good, it's a good part of the conversation, and then if they do need inventory synchronization because they have a brick and mortar store and a web store as well, then they might be looking at something else in between, that their QuickBooks. So maybe a point of sale software or something like that does synchronize inventory, because if they're selling things out of their store online, they need to know their inventory levels as well. So that's all part of the discovery process, right? When you're talking to your client, what's best for you, and how can I help you with that? And I love this topic because in my business I can sell a website too. So and that has an e-commerce platform. So these are very helpful tips that you're giving me, and we just happen to have an audience as well. So this is great.
Great. All right, so let's talk about inventory and cost of goods sold, because you're right, Dan. I think e-commerce has all the components of everything that we run away from. And in fact, I was running away from e-commerce for a long time because I don't want to deal with it. It's so technical. But at the same time, I've always dealt with technical topics, and expertise is really what I I think the cornerstone of my business and my positioning is being an expert in certain areas so that I can be that sought after expert. And so yes, e-commerce has a lot of nuances, a lot of complexity. So one of
Yeah,
those
we
is
haven't even talked about shipping.
yeah. And so one of those is inventory and cost of goods sold. So what we need to know here is that we want to, for the most part, avoid tracking inventory items. And you'll see that I'm mentioning QuickBooks Online a lot because that's primarily what I specialize in. You possibly could track inventory in QuickBooks Enterprise because it's more robust, but for QuickBooks Online, it has limited functionality and it's not really made for e-commerce, because in QBO or even in desktop, when you're selling inventories based on selling it because you invoiced a customer, and when you enter that invoice, it's in the background updating inventory and cost of goods sold. Well, you don't have invoices, and so that pretty much breaks the workflow in QuickBooks in general for e-commerce sellers. So for the most part, then we want to avoid tracking inventory details or inventory by item in QuickBooks. And so then what are your options? So one is for those very small sellers, then I encourage them to at least track their inventory on a spreadsheet. And at the very least, we talk about tracking inventory once a year for tax purposes. And for them, again, if they're very, very small, maybe under $100,000 in sales, maybe they do this on the side. It's not their full-time business, then they find that easy to do. But as Dan said, if you have if you're also doing point of sale, you have a physical location, or you're selling on multiple channels, then the problem is that, well, how do you track inventory what is it, real-time inventory when you're selling on multiple channels? Because you might have 5 widgets and maybe you sold 3 on Amazon a minute ago, and now you sold 2 on Shopify 2 minutes ago. And so then you have to know, okay, how many do I really have so that I can fulfill those orders. So then we have to look at cloud inventory apps. And the ones that I recommend, that other people who do e-commerce recommend, are Ecom Dash, Soho Inventory, Deer Systems, and Sin7. And there are some others that are higher priced as well, but these are in general the ones that I recommend to my clients. And again, it depends on their needs and what's going to work for their specific business.
Yeah, that's a huge call out, because when you have, I mean, even just Amazon itself, there's so many different ways to sell on Amazon. Are they sending their inventory to the fulfillment center, and then Amazon's actually doing the sending out of the inventory? Do they want to keep track of that? Obviously, they would. Typically, they want to know where their stuff is at any given time. But yeah, then when you add another sales channel like eBay or Etsy, or even their website, it gets exponentially more difficult to manage, and that's where another solution would come in handy to be able to manage that.
Yeah, I work with a client that sells like high-end home decor items. Mm-hmm. And they sell at a physical store and online, and they're using Shopify. And then Shopify has a point of sale system as well as being able to sell online. And even that, even though it is in the same sales channel, is very challenging for them because they have to manage the inventory and they can't manage it. That's another thing to understand, is that you don't necessarily manage the inventory within these sales channels. You have to do it separately. And in this case, our client uses Ecom Dash.
Gotcha.
All right, so So then how do we track that inventory if we're not going to track inventory items in QuickBooks? As I said, either you have a spreadsheet using that inventory app, you're going to then calculate what the dollar amount of that inventory cost as of the end of the month or end of the year. And in QuickBooks, and then you're adjusting the inventory amount using a journal entry. So it makes it simple from that standpoint. We don't have to track inventory in QuickBooks, but again, it's more about then how are you going to track it outside of QuickBooks, and helping our clients to figure out what's the best way to do that.
So with most of what you're referring to, the customer is going to be living in their e-commerce app, for lack of a better word, and then like you as the bookkeeper would be living in QuickBooks and making those behind the scenes adjustments.
Exactly, and I think also that it's probably a really good thing to do that, because I think most e-commerce sellers understand that it is very complex to try to do their own books. And they also know that if they do their financials based on just what's being deposited in QuickBooks, they're not getting a true picture of their profitability, and especially with Amazon, because Amazon has so many fees. and so I think it really encourages that relationship with my e-commerce clients of not just the support and value that I bring, but also what they see in QuickBooks is helping them really get a clear picture of their profits, instead of them trying to get in there and trying to work on their bookkeeping, which I think when I look at other clients in other industries, that's more their mindset is they're trying to do their own books instead of trying to see how profitable they are.
Awesome. I think next we have another poll. So
we do.
All right. So yeah, how many e-commerce clients do you currently have? None, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, or more than that? One of the questions that came up is, I don't know if we're going to be talking about this today or have enough time, is about the purchase side of how purchasing works when e-commerce is involved. Do you want to maybe address that?
Yes, I mean, I can do it very quickly. Do you want me to talk about that now while they're doing their poll?
Yeah, if you, okay. I didn't know if we had a slide devoted for purchasing or.
We don't, but when I was talking about the apps to track inventory, they're also apps that are where you do all of the inventory management, including the purchasing. So then you've got purchase orders, the inventory receipts, all of that is then being managed in those cloud inventory apps. So hopefully I answer that person's question, but yeah, so it is much, aside from just tracking inventory, you're doing the whole purchase management in those apps.
Yeah, same kind of thing of what we were talking about before, where management, they're going to live in the e-commerce side of things. That's where they're going to do the ins and outs of the daily activity, and then the QuickBooks side of things is really just the landing, the foundation of that business.
Yeah.
Let's share the results. All right, so most people either have 1 or 2 clients or none at all. And then we have some other folks that are in this niche, like you, Veronica. Okay, so moving back to where we left off. Sales tax, yeah.
Run away while you can.
All of a sudden, our attendance just dropped off. I don't know what happened.
Don't go away. So yeah, if it wasn't complex enough, then you have to throw in sales tax, which has been changing quite a bit in the last year. So right away, I'm giving you some resources for you to check out. Avalara has some great resources And what you have to understand that the rules change and they continue to change. So be aware of where you're getting this information. And I would certainly not trust the Facebook groups or any forums for what the rules are. As I said, Avalara has some very good resources. So I've given you those resources. And also understand that each state has specific rules. I mean, I sometimes get questions from people of like, I'm in the state of California and I need to know how to do blah, blah, blah. And like, okay, I'm in Texas. I don't really know, but I would look it up. I would contact that state. I would make sure that I understood what was required, and definitely don't assume. And most of all, if you don't know, even after you've looked up the rules for that state, I would contact that state's Department of Revenue to make sure that I'm following exactly what they want me to do. Also look out for local rules. So counties, municipalities have different rules as well.
Yeah, I used to have a friend who worked at the Arizona Department of Revenue, and I just asked her how many different municipalities, because everything came into the state office, and then she would then divvy it up by municipalities, and she said there's 500 different municipalities just in the state of Arizona that have different rules about what's taxable, where it's taxable, that sort of thing. And when you talked about, okay, you do talk about Nexus a little bit more, so let's that segues right into my next question about what is a Nexus, because
Yes.
I have a street here up the road that's called Nexus, and that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, so Nexus, which is an odd word that doesn't come up except I think in this case, the definition is the level of connection between a taxing jurisdiction such as a state and an entity such as a business. So it's just that what level of connection does a business have with a state, for example. And in the past, it used to be easy because it was just physical presence. If you had a physical presence in that state or that county or municipality, then you had to collect and remit sales taxes. So that was easy enough. But one of the challenges then becomes that for Amazon, what we call FBA, which means fulfilled by Amazon, for those sellers, they have physical presence when they ship products to Amazon and they ship them to different Amazon facilities throughout the country. So by having those products in those different states, now you have Nexus. So that adds a layer of complexity, and especially I think Amazon will sometimes send your product from one warehouse in one state to another without you knowing it. And all of a sudden, like, oh, you now have Nexus in these other states as well.
Yeah, that was a big, a few years ago, that was a big advantage of online selling is, I don't have to charge sales tax. Well, the states realized, hey, we're missing out on a lot of revenue because things are being sold in our state, but not being remitted as far as sales tax payments, either by the seller or the supplier.
Yeah. So then, as you said, the states got smart and said, hey, we need our share of the revenue. So then now we have economic nexus. So economic nexus allows the states to look to criteria beyond physical presence in evaluating that connection. And if you haven't heard of the South Dakota versus Wayfair court case in June of 2008, basically the U.S. Supreme Court upheld this decision, allowing the state of South Dakota to begin collecting sales taxes based on economic nexus, and then a large number of states have followed suit after that, also having their own economic nexus rules. So what you have to understand is that each state has thresholds, and if you look at the links that we're providing, it's on the previous slide, the links to all of the Avalara resources, then you can look up the rules by state and by different type of nexus, and then they will show you these thresholds. The thresholds can be a minimum amount of sales or a minimum amount of transactions. For some states, the thresholds are really large because they're trying to go after the big guys and not the little guys. And so I see a lot of accountants and bookkeepers that kind of panic that, oh, this client is selling online and what are we going to do about sales taxes? Well, understand, first of all, again, the rules are different for every state, and each state has a threshold. And so then you don't collect sales tax if you're below the threshold. You have to keep an eye on that threshold, on the thresholds. But the state of Kansas does not have a threshold. So if you have clients who are selling in the state of Kansas, then you need to help them assess their risk and determine whether they need, they should be filing in that state.
When you say selling in, this gets a little confusing. So does that mean that they're obviously they're not physically in the state of Kansas, but if they're selling to or shipping to the client, their end customer buying online, they could be anywhere. They could be in California, New York, Florida. If they have a customer who is in Kansas, that's what you're talking about, and then that's where they're shipping it to.
Yes, that's that. Thank you for that nuance, because then it's economic nexus. You don't have to physically be in that state. You're selling to people in that state. So yes. All right. Next is let me see, sales tax apps. So then how do we track this? How do we know if we met the threshold, and what do we do once we have met these thresholds in these states? So you have the option of filing these sales taxes manually, which I know some people do, or you can use apps. The apps that you can use are Avalara, TaxJar, and Taxify are the ones that are probably the gold standard that you can use.
And now what do they, where do they come in relation to the tech, so do they integrate into the
sales channel,
and then they'll pull out all that information and then keep you in compliance, which is great, because then there's a penalty involved if you don't do that.
Right. And some apps like TaxJar, you can sign up for free and they will monitor all the thresholds for you. When you connect, TaxJar, say to Shopify, for example, and then once you meet the threshold, then you help your client to register for those sales taxes, and only then you begin collecting and remitting those sales taxes. So you don't want to be collecting sales taxes before you register. You have to do it after you register.
So with regards to sales tax, it's more of a, when do I cross the threshold? And then once I cross the threshold, then I need to register, and then I need to start collecting and remitting. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And finally, then you have to understand that on top of all that, now we have marketplace facilitator states. And so this is where the states try to make it easier for the big guys, again, the Amazon, the Walmart, Etsy, Wayfair, those sellers, those marketplaces, to actually collect and remit sales taxes on behalf of online sellers. And so it makes it easier for those online sellers, because they don't have to now worry about necessarily filing and remitting. But something to keep in mind, which I've had a couple of clients come across this. Some of these rules went into effect in October of last year, and some of my clients were still paying sales taxes even after Amazon started collecting and paying sales taxes on their behalf. So now that we've done their books, we found that they actually overpaid their sales taxes. So they're so worried about being in compliance, they don't realize that, like, oh, Amazon's already collecting this for me and I don't have to. So a lot of opportunities, I think, to help clients be in compliance, to help clients to save money if they're overpaying their taxes, and help them to really feel more confident in what they're doing, because they're actually really scared of all of these rules, and because they are very complex.
Great.
All right, and on to the next poll.
Okay, yeah. So our next poll is, which of all the things that we've shown here today, what seems to be the most challenging to set up or use? So inventory, sales tax, the integrations piece, or choosing an online sales platform. So a couple of flagged questions that we had coming in that we could maybe address. Michelle, you want to bring those up, or?
No, well, no, that's okay. I flagged them, and if
Okay.
you wanted to read them, that's fine. But yeah, we had a couple for Veronica, so you can go ahead and read them to her. That's fine.
Okay. So what do you find is the best inventory app for clients who use QBO with a storefront? So that's a lot of nuances right just in the question.
Yeah, so if they have a storefront, Lightspeed is one that you might look at, because it's really it's actually, I think, made for a point of sale storefront type business, and then they have added functionality for also selling online.
That's cool. Now the automated sales tax in QBO, the new sales tax center, is that compatible with third-party apps that do the invoicing or the sales?
Not to my knowledge, and that it might depend on each app, but basically once you're using these third-party sales tax apps, you're managing your sales tax in those apps, filing the sales taxes through those apps, and so you're just recording a sales tax liability in QuickBooks, and then when you make the payment, you're relieving that liability. So
Gotcha.
you're not using the sales tax center at that point.
So just like with inventory, you're not managing the sales tax component of that you're just really handling the accounting piece of that.
Correct. Yeah. So in some ways, if you think about it, some aspects of e-commerce are easier to do from an accounting standpoint, because we're not having to mess with the inventory center in QuickBooks or the sales tax center in QuickBooks, and then you have other things that are more complex to deal with.
Yeah. So I mean, again, what we had talked about before about who lives where. You as the bookkeeper would live in QBO, and you're really focused on the bookkeeping piece of that. These niche or these specific workflows are going to be handled in the different apps that you manage. And there's a couple questions about tax jar. Do they pay the sales tax for you? I know that Avalara has a variety of different sales tax services that they offer. One is determining your Nexus, and then there's another where they actually keep you in compliance. I assume TaxJar does the same.
Actually don't know specifically, so I might have to look into that, but I think they all offer some level of, beyond just tracking the sales tax, but I would have to look.
Yeah, I saw a demonstration of Avalara, and I was surprised to know that there's 5 different services that they offer when it comes to sales tax. I thought it was just, oh, okay, we'll pay your sales tax and collect that for you.
Yeah, and there are some services too, and I think one that I didn't mention is called LumaTax, that will actually do an assessment, so a risk assessment, and essentially look at all of the different states in which a seller has any sort of nexus, and then determine whether they have to actually registering them, and helping them manage the sales tax as well.
Yeah, and all of those sales tax apps, I mean, they're great resources. Just if you don't even use them, they have a lot of free resources to keep you aware of what the rules are, what rules have changed, and then at least give you an idea of, okay, maybe we need to add this on.
Yeah, so again, it's like when I was talking about assessing and different apps as far as connecting QBO and your sales channels, it's all the same for any app of assessing the client's needs, understanding what they really need, what's specific to their business, finding a solution for them, testing and implementing.
Gotcha. So as far as the poll results, it was pretty split between what was most challenging. Integrations did take the lead there, and that is a big part of that. But to your point, Veronica, if you have those kind of needs, and then you find a favorite that really works for you, and then you get more experience in that particular one, then it's not like a curveball when someone new comes in and they have 5 sales channels or something like that. You have a better point of reference.
Yeah, and one thing to think about is that, and what I plan to do, I'm just still, I feel like I'm still new in this niche because I switched to this niche last year and I'm still learning a lot. But I would probably then end up choosing perhaps a particular sales channel and even a specific, like say, I'm going to specialize only on clients that use TaxJar or only on clients that use Ecom Dash, and to narrow down that niche even more, because then that would allow me to be like really, really good and knowledgeable in those specific apps. There are people that only specialize in Amazon sellers. I happen to like people who sell on Shopify. So you just never know. You have to be open, I think, in this niche there's a lot of complexity, a lot of variety, and then probably narrow it down further, or even to specific types of sellers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, my web solution offering really only works with WebGility, so that has kind of guided me as far as what apps I want to specialize in, because I have a way to get that, and then there's an app to do that.
Yeah.
So our last, I think we're just going to wrap up here. I mean, we're coming in for a landing.
Yes.
Hopefully we didn't overwhelm everyone.
Right, because we could talk about it for days and hours. Yeah, so just as a wrap up, to understand that the e-commerce, and by the way, well, I normally do lowercase e-commerce to answer your question, Dan, from before, how do you the proper spelling? But yeah, so to wrap up, e-commerce is complex. You have to understand in terms of accounting that you have sales channels, you have payment processors, there are timing differences. The different apps can make it very complex, as well as inventory and cost of goods sold and how you manage that, how you track it, and sales taxes, as we just talked. However, in that complexity, you have opportunities to become an advisor to your clients, especially when it comes to app integrations. And as we talked about, choosing the right apps for them, helping them integrate those apps, streamlining their systems and processes, especially once you have some these sellers that are selling in multiple channels. They can put together some very clunky processes. And as I talked about the client that sells these high-end home decor items, that boy, it was just amazing what they were attempting to do, and obviously seeing it wasn't working for them, and then helping them streamline what they're doing. Helping clients with their inventory management, the purchasing cycle, inventory cycle, helping them also to understand what they need to do, because many of them don't know, as well as managing, customizing, streamlining that, and even helping clients set up their accounting structure. What are the accounts that they need in their chart of accounts to properly do e-commerce accounting? What else, or managing inventory? Okay, how do you adjust inventory? Cost of goods sold is the other. How do I, well, if you adjust inventory, you're adjusting cost of goods, but helping them to set up that accounting structure so that they can get good numbers and again, have a clear view into their profits. And lastly, beware of integrations. Always gonna be aware of those integrations. Avoid the data dump. Make sure that you understand what these apps are doing when they're sending data over to QuickBooks, because you can end up with some huge data dump. And as we said before, if you don't have a good backup or you haven't tested, then you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, right before I logged in here, I was taking out the trash, speaking of dump, and the bag broke. And and coffee grounds were everywhere, and that's the kind of accounting mess you can be dealing with when you're dealing with an app that says works with QuickBooks.
Oh,
You want to get an
Gotta be
understanding
careful.
of, yeah, you want buyer beware. Make sure you understand, well, what does that mean? Is it an IIF file and it doesn't even work with QuickBooks Online or something like that? Or do you need now another app to get that information into your QuickBooks Online?
yeah. And even the ones that say that they will track inventory in QuickBooks, I run away. Unless, I mean, again, it's the ones that I have seen. I don't know if they all do that, but just beware of, okay, again, make sure that's really the best way to go. Test it out, make sure that it works.
Awesome. Good tips and tricks what you're talking about here today. So I think our last poll is coming up, and that was just informative. Do you want to know more about the apps that work in e-commerce? So like we talked a lot about TaxJar or Avalara for sales tax, or A2X. If we had them on, would you find use in that? And so we had a couple questions while you're filling that out. Let's see here. Inventory assemblies. We didn't even talk about, that nuance of inventory. Do you have any suggestions, Veronica, for inventory assembly apps for e-commerce, or is that really covered in those apps that you already talked about?
Not in all of them that I talked about, but there are certainly cloud inventory apps that will manage assemblies, and it's a matter of identifying which ones those are. I don't have clients that have assemblies right now, so I don't know of specific apps to tell you, but I know that they are there.
Awesome. Yeah, I had I first learned about this at last year's Scaling New Heights. I went to a breakout for e-commerce, and wow, yeah, there was just, I thought I knew a lot about it, but then I was realized, there's more. There's more to know. But I love the way that you really kind of laid it out and kind of broke it out into the different areas and those different nuances of those areas. So this has been a great session. I really appreciate you coming on. So definitely from the poll, a big thought about yes, that it would be a good idea to learn some more. And maybe we can bring some apps to come in and talk about their solution in the QB Power Hour. So we have a few minutes before the close. I know Hector Garcia is doing a very timely webinar today as well about further helping yourself work from home. So in this environment, that seems to be a hot commodity. A lot of people are needing to do that if they're not already. So I want to give him the opportunity to be able to, if you need to hop off, we certainly understand that if you want to attend that webinar as well. And then a lot of people had some questions. Veronica, how can they get in touch with you? What's the best way to get in touch with you moving forward? I think you have we put your contact information again, the best way on the next slides. If you want to, since you're in control, can you advance the,
Okay, sorry.
the slide there? One more.
Yes. So
There we go.
best way, if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation, is to join my Facebook group. And that's excuse me, 5-minute bookkeeping with QuickBooks online. And we have a link to that in the handout. If you have other specific questions or anything else, you can even message me through Facebook or go to my website, VM Wasek, and connect with me through that as well.
Awesome. Michelle, any closing thoughts?
No, Veronica, we really appreciate sharing your knowledge with all of our listeners and things like that. One thing Belinda had asked is, what are some specific shows or conferences that you went? Any tips for somebody who wants to start specializing in this, or any pointers that you could share with them?
Absolutely. So number one is, as I've, even for my own self, because I like to call myself an expert, and I am an expert in many areas, e-commerce, that I can't say I'm there yet, but I have a goal within, I guess now it's within 9 months to be an expert in e-commerce. So first of all, you won't know everything about e-commerce, and you have to be okay with that. Second is check out Catching Clouds Academy. They sell an Amazon accounting course and a Shopify accounting course, and I purchased both courses, and that was the foundation for me to learn. The other person to watch is Brittany Brown with Ledger Gurus. They specialize in e-commerce, and they have a lot of resources on their website through their blog. I pretty much read every blog post that they had. If you go to cpaacademy.org, Brittany Brown also has webinars that she has done on e-commerce. And again, for me, it was just consuming everything available about e-commerce from those resources. And I think lastly is if you're one of those people that, like me, that I'm this workflows nerd, that understanding the different marketplaces or sales channels, the payment processors, and what you see in the bank account is tracing the transactions from the sales channel to the payment processor to QuickBooks. Understanding how that works will help you a lot, because once you get that understanding, most sales channels work in a very similar way. And I mean, there are new sales channels that I'm hearing about all the time, new payment processors. And so instead of telling the client, no, I don't work with that, just say, well, yeah, we'll have to figure it, I may need to figure it out because I haven't come across it before, but because I understand how these how other things work in e-commerce, and it's fairly easy to figure it out.
Awesome. Well, we can
Those
tell
are great resources.
Yeah, and of course, sales tax, all the resources that I gave you, check those out as well. And also in my YouTube channel, I'm continuing to put out videos about e-commerce. So I have a playlist specific to e-commerce, and check that out as well. In some of those videos, I'm literally learning something like that day and doing a video about it, because my learning curve is very steep right now. But
I found that out as a trainer. Once you can teach it to somebody else, that just exponentially increases your understanding of that. So even if you're fumbling through it, but I assume these videos are less than 5 minutes.
Some are, yeah, some actually, typically my videos are about 5 minutes. My sales tax video that just came out is I think about 15 minutes, because it's rather complex.
Right, you can definitely get on some tangents here. So yeah, so again, I want to thank you for sharing your passion with our audience at QB Power Hour, and I really appreciate you coming on today and taking some of your time out of your day to help our group, and this was fantastic. And we'll have try to have the recording posted up this evening, and then have it out on the podcast so you can review all of the great tips and tricks that Veronica passed on here today. So thanks
Yes,
again
thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we will see you next time where we talk about the bank feeds, another place that people run away from. Right, have a great day.
Thank you all. Everybody
Bye,
stay
everyone.
safe and healthy. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.